guys, I'm here at the creative web event for Adobe. I'm looking forward, and let's see what Adobe has for us today. So I'm here in London, and it's the 2nd of October. Let's have a look on it. It looks like we've got a queue. Let's have a look on that. Let's see what we got in here. Looks like a queue for the event. Let me zoom in. We are queuing for Create the Web, so let's jump into the queue as well. Okay, managed to get my badge, my name on it, Create the Web tour, and I'm on my way to the theatre.
The complexities are growing up, and it's also going higher. At the same time, also the number of browsers in the space is also growing. So now you have to worry about multiple browsers across multiple screens and multiple platforms. So again, while the capabilities of the web have really grown, so has the complexity of developing that content. So these new capabilities on the modern web have really enabled new types of creative content and experiences, and that's something we're really excited about at Adobe. And our goal, what we're really focusing on around the web, is to enable the most expressive experiences on the web possible. And there's two core reasons for that. First of all, we build on top of this platform ourselves. We launched Creative Cloud earlier this year, and this is a core initiative at Adobe that's built on top of the web platform. Some of the tools and services we'll talk about later today also built on top of the web platform. So that richness is really important to us as a services and tools provider. But then also to that point, we provide these tools and services for designers and developers like you to create really great content. The more expressive stuff you can create on the web, the more need there is for the tools and services we provide. So having a really rich, robust web is something that's core to Adobe and to what we're trying to do. So how does Adobe help move the web forward? There's really two ways that we do this and that we contribute to moving the web forward. The first of what I like to refer to is kind of contributing to the infrastructure of the web. So these are things like working in the W3 working groups, working on draft specifications around CSS, contributing code and patches directly to browsers. So kind of the low-level core infrastructure of the web, we're active in that space moving forward. We'll actually talk about that a little more in just a minute. The second area is in creating tools, technologies, and services that enable designers and developers like you to create content for the web. And that's not just, this is a space we've always been in, right? We've always been creating some of the leading web development tools, Photoshop, Illustrator, Dreamweaver, Fireworks. But part of our goal is to, and part of the way we see that we help move the web forward is by creating these tools that make it easier for you to create really great experiences on the web, and also make it easier to create like cutting-edge experiences. And we're going to actually spend some time talking about that later in this session, and then actually through the day we'll go into more detail on that. So getting back to kind of this first bucket of how Adobe helps move the web forward, we really focus our efforts in three key areas when we're thinking about how we're going to help move the core infrastructure of the web forward. The first is magazine-style advanced layout, and a lot of this comes from our history in print design. So we're really trying to bring the richness that you can get on the printed page to the web, and that's through things like CSS exclusions, CSS regions. The second area is cinematic effects. So the ability to, at runtime, create really great visual effects, and that's through work through CSS filters and CSS custom filters. And then advanced graphical effects. And these are taking things that normally you would have had to have done in author time in maybe Photoshop or Fireworks, and allowing you to do those at runtime in the browser. That's through initiatives such as CSS blending and CSS composition. Now, if you followed the work we've been doing, and maybe you're at Max last year or watched the keynote online, some of this stuff may seem familiar. We talked about CSS exclusions and regions last year at Max. And this is an area where it's a long-term process. So we've been talking about some of this stuff for a while, and we're actually really excited because we're starting to see some of this work that we've been working on over the past couple of years start to make it into shipping browsers. So CSS regions and exclusions are starting to make it into some browsers. In fact, just last week, Apple released iOS 6, and that included the version of Safari on there actually included support for CSS filters, which is a standard that Adobe worked on, helped contribute some of that code to WebKit, which ultimately made its way into Safari. So, working on this end is really exciting to see all this work we've been working on over the past couple of years, going through the standardization process, contributing code to enable this type of functionality. It's really exciting to see that start to get into shipping browsers. So I actually want to shift over to this machine right here. And Ryan has a password on his laptop.
Just shout it out.
Yeah. This is actually a couple of things. First of all, it's just a really great tool for playing around with CSS filters, seeing what they can do, and actually grabbing the CSS from it. But it's also a really useful tool to actually create these filters, test them, animate them. So let's look at this, and this is based on work that we've been working on with the W3C and some code we've been contributing to WebKit over the past year. So here I have just an HTML element, and then I have access to some of the built-in CSS filters. And these are actually available in Safari now, Divya? Yes. Yes, they're available in Safari today, which is actually really cool. And these are some of the ones actually available in Safari on iOS. So these are, just the built-in filters. So I can do something like a simple blur, set some properties on that. I can invert the colors. And then let's see, I like this one, you can saturate it, so bring up the saturation. So again, really simple way to explore some of the built-in filters. I know it's kind of hard to see, but down here at the bottom, it's actually creating the CSS for you that you could just copy and then paste into your own project and get the same type of effect on your HTML elements. So that's cool. You can play with this today. But what I am really excited about is custom filters. So there are CSS filters provide some built-in filters. We just looked at a couple of them. So there's a set of those. But it also, we're working on a standard specification for CSS custom filters. And basically this is a specification that will allow you to define your own vertex and fragment shaders, which really means you can do pretty much anything you want, anything visually that you want to HTML. This in my project. So what I want to do is, so this is a pretty cool effect. So let's actually make it where when the page starts up, it'll actually animate that effect using CSS animation. So there's actually a timeline in here, which you can't see because it's cut off at the bottom. Just take my word for it. There's a timeline down here. So I'm actually going to move this keyframe over, and then let's change the scroll position, right? So now if I run that, you see I get this really nice page scroll effect. So like you can imagine you come to the page and this content unfurls. Again, this is just CSS custom filters being applied to an HTML element in the page. If we go down here, you can actually, again, look at the WebKit or the CSS that's being generated. It's pretty straightforward. It's just loading in the custom shaders. And then you can actually see the CSS animation syntax that it's creating to actually animate those page scrolls. And one thing that we've been hearing from you is that we had this workflow before where I, as a designer, would I may be working in Photoshop, I'm mocking up my designs, and then often I'm handing those over to a developer who's actually in charge of implementing that design. And there's often a breakdown in that handover. Now, there are a lot of really talented people who can do some design and code as well, so they have a little more control. But a lot of you have been telling us that you work in a workflow that consists of handing over a lot of your design over, and that doesn't always go as smoothly as either side would want. And this is so we're not trying to create monolithic applications that do everything. We've done that in the past, and there's a place for those, but we're really trying to very targeted, focused apps in the Edge web tools and services. And then they're really focused on improving productivity without hiding the underlying web technologies. And in fact, in a lot of cases, we're actually building on top of those very technologies for these tools. So I'm going to quickly go through the tools that are included in here. So there's Edge Animate for creating interactive animated web content, Edge Reflow for designing responsive websites, Typekit for using high-quality fonts on the web, Adobe Edge Web Fonts, so Edge Web Fonts to help you get started with free web fonts on the web, Edge Code for coding HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, Edge Inspect for previewing and inspecting web designs on mobile devices, and PhoneGap Build for packaging mobile applications in the cloud. Now, we're not going to go over each one of those in this session today. We'll actually talk about a couple of them. Through the rest of the day, we'll actually drill down. We have sessions that drill down on each individual tool, goes in a lot more in depth. But I like to actually spend the rest of the time going over a couple of these. So the first area I want to talk about is Adobe and typography. So one of the services included in Adobe Edge Tools and Services is Typekit. Typekit joined the Adobe family about a year ago, and we've been really excited about it. It's worked out really well. Typekit is a service for discovering and deploying beautiful fonts on the web. So you basically go, find some great fonts and then use them in your web projects as web fonts. We've had a lot of growth over the past year. We've added a lot of new fonts. So now we have over 1,200 font families from 53 foundries, or actually 54 foundries. We added monotype fonts announced last week. They will be adding some of the really popular fonts from monotype to Typekit. And from the very beginning of Typekit, even before they were with part of Adobe, really focused on ubiquity. And that's not just ubiquity of the type of Typekit as a service. That's the ubiquity of beautiful typography on the web and beautiful web experiences with great type. And so to that end, we've been working with Google over the past couple of months. You may be familiar with the project that Google's had called Google Web Fonts. This is a collection of open source web fonts from Google that you could actually download and use in your projects. So we've been working with Google to curate some of those fonts, and we've launched a new service called the Adobe Edge Web Fonts. And this is a new service from Adobe that provides over 500 open source and free fonts. So these include some of the fonts from Google Web Fonts, also includes additional fonts from Adobe and some other sources. Open URLs for each family. And so what that means is that you don't have to sign up for an account. You can basically just grab the URL for the font you need, use it in your project, open source, free licensing. Use them however you want. Again, you don't have to sign up for anything, so it's truly free and open source. The library is curated by Adobe with technical improvements and integration. And specifically, we're spending some time doing some hand hinting on some of these fonts, updating them so they look really great on today's really high resolution, high DPI displays. And this is all powered and served by the infrastructure that serves Typekit. That's the infrastructure that serves fonts, web fonts to over 1.5 million websites in the world. We've done something like 8 billion font views from that service. So it's a proven infrastructure. So we're really excited about this enable have. And it's something that really defined and set the standard for how we approach working on these new class of tools for modern web development. We're very open about how we worked on this. We've had 7 public previews, over 500,000 downloads over this time. And the community involvement and input that we received over that time really influenced the direction of the tool over the past year and a half. And we learned a ton from building this tool. And this is actually why we named Edge Tools and Services Edge. It was named after what we learned from this tool. So Adobe Animate, or Adobe Edge Animate, is basically a tool that creates interactive animated content using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And it provides a consistent experience across browsers. Excuse me.
Animate. I don't know, who in here has downloaded Edge? Has anybody played with it just by a show of hands? Okay, cool. So you guys have seen it progress. Maybe you've been involved in the different previews. And it's really cool what it can do. I can literally take an HTML page, open it up in Edge Animate if I want to, and start bringing it to life. And that's what I have here. I have this project, 40 years of trends and technology and everything. And this is a perfect project that I want to bring to life with animation and interactivity. So here I am. I have these objects, pretty straightforward. They're graphics, ping files. And in order to move them or animate them, even before I even get into that, check this out. If we take a peek just right over here, percent-based positioning. Okay, so I can have it absolute, or say, hey, you know what, always be 18% from the edge. So this is going to be really flexible when it comes to these different browsers, because I want this to work on tablet devices and other devices as well. So that's percent-based. That looks good. For this project, I want this content to kind of animate up and out, so it's going to start actually down here. And check this out. Watch the timeline. So as I move these objects, you can see it starts to add these keyframes. It does it for me. I'll move this photo down there, and you can see that timeline being built, those keyframes saying, hey, I'm going to be at this point in time, at the very beginning. So I can start them all right there. In fact, for this photo, I can rotate it. Again, just using my Properties panel. So anything in the Properties panel, I can take a look at it and say, hey, you know what, I want to animate with that.